Oh, hi everyone. I just thought I'd just pop on ever so quickly, just say hello. Probably going to be waiting another couple of minutes just to let the last few people have some time to join in. So if you want to go grab a coffee, if you've not got one already, yeah, we'll get going in just a couple of minutes. I might just put some music on for that time so we can make sure that our sound is working as well. I will be back very shortly. So, hi everyone, Adam here. I think we're going to get started now. Welcome, thanks for joining us. I'm hoping you're enjoying the weather this week. That's my really tedious intro of going straight for the British trope of talking about the weather, but it has been nice this week, so hopefully it is nice for you today as well. We're going to be talking about pre-design today. So before we get going, we're just going to go through a few little bits and pieces and just set the scene a smidge. So my name is Adam Fairclough. I'm the Customer Success Manager here at ElmTech and SketchUp UK. ElmTech are the exclusive distribution partner for SketchUp in the UK and Ireland, so the chances are you have purchased SketchUp from one of the authorised resellers in the UK. Amongst other things, I'm primarily responsible for end user learning and support. So I imagine I've spoken to many of you. I recognise a number of the names on the list there. If you ever want to say hi, drop me an email, ask me a question about SketchUp or anything related to it, just drop me an email. I love to hear from people. So before we get going, there's going to be a few housekeeping rules. Nothing too complicated, but we're going to be recording this. We'll share this with you afterwards, so if you have joined in slightly late and you want to see this intro, this wonderful intro, or you want to catch the end of it again, by all means you can watch it there. We're going to have you kept on mute throughout the webinar, and I've turned on the questions box in the control panel in just the I think it should be on the left hand side of the screen for everybody. If not, you might have a slightly different interface. But it's going to look something like this. Click on your little speech bubble, pop something in the chat message, and there is a team of people here to answer your questions. If we can't answer any questions, or if we can't answer any questions during the actual webinar itself, we'll let you know via email separately if it's a complicated one. So yeah, I mean, those kind of questions, how to get so handsome, you won't know that today because I've not got my webcam on. My hair is so awful, I didn't want to inflict my current look on anyone. You'll also find in the handouts there, in the section there, the little handout just about PreDesign. So that's just a little summary of some of the things that we've talked about today. So you can grab that and download that on the side also. It will look something like this. So yes, as we said, questions in the side, and I think we'll probably get going. So here's today's agenda. We're going to have a look at where PreDesign fits in, or how it fits in. We're going to have a look at the problem that PreDesign solves. We're going to do a demo of PreDesign and show you through one of the walkthroughs, and we'll have a look at the app, and we're going to have a look at how PreDesign also then can fit in with the design process within SketchUp and within 3D Warehouse itself. So let's crack on. Let's go for how PreDesign fits in. So let's briefly talk about how PreDesign fits in with the SketchUp ecosystem. And when we talk about SketchUp, SketchUp Pro as an ecosystem, we're talking about a whole pile of different products, many of which you will be really familiar with and some that you maybe will be less familiar with. But right in the middle, we've got the Pro desktop client, which is the application that sits on your computer and allows you to draw and model things in 3D. But as a subscriber, there are a load of other applications that you can also get access to. Things like Layout, which allow you to convert your SketchUp model into drawings and documentation. We've got 3D Warehouse, which allows models to be downloaded that other people have built or even manufacturers have built. We've got Extension Warehouse that allows us to add new functionality and features into SketchUp. We've got other things like the various VR viewers, Style Builder, and then brilliant things that are also included with the subscription, like Trimble Connect, which is a collaboration platform, and free cloud storage actually for SketchUp users, that allows you to move your files between different programs, allows you to invite teammates or work colleagues into your model, collaborate with people perhaps that are even working in different software that isn't SketchUp, and actually piece together a 3D model made of different file formats. Anyway, let's not talk too much about that. let's talk about what we're going to be talking about today, which is PreDesign. So PreDesign is an extra tool in the toolkit of the SketchUp subscription, and this is a product that will help you to enhance your design research right at the beginning of a project. So it is intended to be something that happens right at the beginning of the design process, well, pre-design, I suppose, if we're sticking with the name. So this is before we have drawn any sketches, before we've modelled anything in 3D. We're going to be having a look at climate and environment, and maybe how that will influence and inform some of our later decisions as we start to get through to that part of the process. So there's a few different workflows to work through the SketchUp ecosystem with PreDesign. So it might be that we do our initial research within PreDesign. Perhaps we move into 3D Warehouse, where we can find some examples of certain glazing or shading strategies, which we can then pull through into the main component of SketchUp, test it, improve it using Sapphira, and then perhaps convert our design into documents or some presentation materials that we may then hand over to the client. So that is kind of the A to Z in a nutshell on the page there. So how do we get to PreDesign? So predesign.sketchup.com, it is a web app, so you can access it if you have a SketchUp Pro subscription. You'll already have access to it right now if you have a Pro or a Studio subscription, if you are an enterprise account user, if you have a student account or a teacher account with a Studio subscription, if you're a separate Sapphira subscriber, or if you're using a SketchUp trial. And just as a note for people that maybe don't have any of those ones right now, the trials have very recently been reset because we've just launched the new version of SketchUp Studio, which also includes Scan Essentials and V-Ray actually. So the trials have been reset, so if you do want to have a look at PreDesign or Scan Essentials or V-Ray, which we'll not be talking about today, you can kick off a brand new trial even if you've had one before. It doesn't come with SketchUp Shop or Free. It's an online service for subscribers only, and it doesn't come with the older style perpetual licenses, and it doesn't come with network licenses. So this is where we are. We'll have a look at it very shortly, and we'll look at other ways that you can access it also via the actual SketchUp desktop client. So let's talk a little bit about the problem that SketchUp wanted to solve with PreDesign, because it's kind of interesting to set the scene a little bit about why this product exists before we go in and show it. So SketchUp spend a lot of time, as you can imagine, speaking to professionals in the field to try and identify problems that might exist or places where the SketchUp products could perhaps be better. And this kind of led to one thing, which was, what does design research at the start of a project mean to you? So design research does have a definition in many workflow plans, and this is the REBA plan of work, and that plan of work includes two phases, which are essentially research phases that are undertaken prior to the creation of a 3D concept: a strategic definition phase and the preparation and brief phase. Now, during these phases, you might do things such as obtain or agree a client brief and owner requirements, and this is almost something that always happens at the start of every project, even if it was something a little bit smaller scale like a house extension. You'd need to agree on the size of the room that be added, what the room is for. People often do site surveys as part of their pre-design research, so they need to understand where the services would run through the site and what those constraints might do in terms of being able to inform the design. And of course you have things like actually understanding the codes that you'll be subject to and the certification pathways that you might want to pursue. And these all help to inform a project from the very start. Now, what SketchUp also found was that a lot of people do climate analysis as well at the start of the design process, and they observed that people tend to create diagrams or report outs such as this psychometric chart or these windroses or sun path diagrams and sky domes. But what SketchUp also found was that when they asked people how they use those diagrams or what those diagrams do to inform their design or how they present that information to clients, people weren't very easily able to articulate what this information is actually telling them. And this is what seemed to be missing from that part of the design research process. This so what that's needed to help take that information to meaningful design suggestions. So let's have a look at why someone would even bother doing design research into climate. Well, one of the things to understand is that SketchUp believes that if you make climate considerations about the environment and the local climate part of your design story, then that's going to be a great way to start your whole project. Think about climate as a design factor throughout the entire process. Considering climate in the design research can help us to avoid exploring concepts that aren't suitable, and also perhaps improves the chances of getting alignment around a design strategy. In other words, done well, climate research at the very start of a project leads to better design outcomes and saves time on aligning with your client and reduces the risk of doing rework later on. So pre-design's sort of designed around that idea, and SketchUp wanted to bring those sorts of benefits to their users. They wanted to make it easier for people to talk to their clients about how the climate affects their design, and wanted to make it easy to understand, to get design direction on strategies that would work well, and understand which design strategies might not work so well, and ultimately help architects and designers have a better conversation with their clients and get buy-in from their design strategies faster, saving time right at the beginning of the design process so we can move on to the detailed phase faster. So with that, I'm going to give you a demonstration today that shows you how pre-design can help you achieve some of these outcomes. So pre-design is a web app which you can visit via our SketchUp Pro subscription, and that is located at predesign.sketchup.com, or you can access it via the file menu in SketchUp as well, and it will fire up your web browser. If you haven't got a subscription, of course, go and try a trial of SketchUp today. There's also a new version of SketchUp Studio which also includes V-Ray, so you can start these trials off fresh even if you've tried one before. So today we're going to take a look at the Bali Garden School demonstration project, and what you'll see when we come into pre-design is that there's 3 demonstration studies, and these are just here to help you orient yourself into what a project can do for you and how you can use it within your design workflow. So we're going to use the Bali Garden Design School as an example project today, and what you'll see on the left hand side here is the different categories that we're going to walk through. So seasons, let's start off with that. So we've got Denpasar, and this is a school in Denpasar, which is the main city in Bali, Indonesia. So we're imagining we're going to be designing a new school project in this new location. If you're going to start a new project, then it doesn't really matter whether this is a location you're familiar with or whether this is a location that you've never designed in before. If you haven't started to think about the climate impact on the design of the building, the first thing you want to do is maybe get alignment with your client around what the climate is actually like. And this page is designed to help people do that. We start with an assessment of what the climate is and what the seasons are like. At the top here, we'll see a nice little catchphrase that talks about the weather and the local climate with your client. It means you can do this right at the start of the project. So what we see here is in Denpasar, it's a tropical savanna climate. There are actually 2 seasons rather than 4, a wet season and a dry season. Each season is given its own characteristics and some straightforward things that we can talk about with the client. So you can get alignment on what different times of the year are like, and in this case potentially highlight that the season with the nice weather tends to be from June to September, and this is when the weather is glorious and when the temperatures are slightly milder than the rest of the year. So once you have an understanding of the climate and you've started to discuss with your client about the climate, then we can take the next step and see what implications that might have for your project. So architectural response. Let's click on this one. Now what we have here is an area where we can take some information that we've learnt about the climate and try and start to connect the dots between that information and the architectural strategies that could be applied. One of the first things that this is telling us about Bali, and this probably isn't a surprise, is that Bali, because Bali is a very popular tourist destination, the weather is a really, really nice place to be for about 61% of the time, and it's so nice that people would much rather be outside than they would be inside. So this means that it's nice and warm and there might be some cool breezes. So why is this important? Well, it means from a design perspective, if you're going to be sympathetic or understanding of your occupants that will use your building, knowing that for a very substantial proportion of the time they would rather be outside, and this can help your architecture respond appropriately. So an appropriate architectural response in that kind of weather would be a building that allows people to be connected between the inside and the outside, with large openings, potentially so people can feel the connection, or potentially even ways to take the inside program space and use outside space as an alternative way to provide that space. But also, because this sort of weather is usually associated with sunshine, it's important to consider to have shading where needed. So in this sort of weather, a subtropical climate or a tropical climate, you can expect it to be hot for a lot of the time, and this here is telling us that for 39% of the time it's actually uncomfortably hot in Bali. Oh yeah, that adds up to 100%, so that's the other bit. Now, what this means is that for our architecture, we need it to respond accordingly to that also. Now, at those times when people might be looking at a building as a way to get shelter from the heat, the building's architectural response would involve more shading and perhaps more control of solar gain, and potentially using fans or air movement or misting for shaded areas outside to make them more comfortable. So that's pretty cool, right? And we've learnt not only can we talk about what the climate is like to our client, but we can also start to connect those dots and identify some of those key architectural strategies, which are going to include big openings to the outside and shading devices as a starting point for our architectural design. Right, so next one. Glazing ratio. Let's have a look at the glazing feature. So one of the things that SketchUp have heard very often from architects is that there's often a discussion early on and later on in the project about how much glass is appropriate for the project. So they wanted to give people information about the kinds of things that might inform how much glass you can have and what kind of strategies you could adopt to potentially have more or less glass on a project. So this is where we can choose what orientation you want to consider for your project. Obviously, because solar gain is one of the factors that might influence how much glass you can have, it's important to be able to choose which orientation you want to consider, and when you're thinking about how much glass is an appropriate time to do this. So we can use this selector here to switch between or choose between different orientations, and now we're in a warm climate, pretty tropical. The main driver of the glazing ratio on this project is going to be the sun. So solar heat gain coming through the unshaded glass will bring a lot of uncomfortable, undesirable heat into the building, and the more glass there is, the more undesirable heat that will be brought in. So this is going to be the key driver for how much glass is suitable to have on our project. The next part here is to give you a feel on if I was to look at a typical strategy for this climate using the optimal, absolute top of the range solution versus a typical strategy. How much would making those facade design changes affect the total amount of glazing that I can use on this facade? And in this instance, you can see that the facade design can have a really big impact on how much glazing that you would actually accommodate on this building. But sometimes it might be that making lots of changes to the facade doesn't really affect how much glass you have, but this makes it a really easy way for you to quickly determine whether it's worth spending time on using this feature to try and explore strategies. And this might help you to understand just how much glass you can have and what the trade-offs might be. It's probably also worth noting that at this time, as well as the maximum glazing percentage as a value to assess options, you can also use this as a proxy for other kinds of performative aspects. It doesn't just have to be glazing performance. Now we're going to assume that this school in Bali has told us that they don't want to use anything other than a single glazing solution with wooden frames or non-metal frames here. And this filter has allowed us to choose this and narrow it down, so we have fewer options to consider. Solutions that focus on the impact of shading, on how much glass we can have, and because of this particular project, it's assumed that the only real lever we'll have to control that solar gain is the amount of glass that's in that building. So what we can see here now is that there are 4 options with different levels of external shading, and we report how the external shading will affect how much glazing that you can have in the project. And you can see here that if we're to use an extensive external shading solution, even with basic glazing like single glazing, we can still potentially go up to sort of 50-ish% glass on this building. Now that's great, and we've got a great way to communicate with our owner or our client what the implications of this climate are likely to be for different orientations for the glazing ratio. So we can pursue design solutions that incorporate more glass. We can use this as a starting point for our budget and understand how much maybe this would cost and what this would mean for our project if we wanted to do that. Let's now look at the shading solutions that might allow us to achieve that. So this page will help us to work out what kind of shading solutions that might be best for this project. And again, it has the orientation selector. And because this is a project in the southern hemisphere, it's just below the equator, we're going to focus on the northern hemisphere for this demonstration today. But you could look at the information across a range of different orientations. The first thing that we do is make a recommendation in the project about shading. So this will help us to get a steer on whether shading will be a good idea or not for that orientation. And in this instance, we can see that we're being strongly recommended shading on this facade. In this climate, it's based upon an assessment of the sky conditions at different times of the year and the exposure of that orientation to those sky conditions, and therefore how much negative sun is likely to be coming in the building. So you'll see here that the sun path diagram has been divided into a series of blocks, and each block has a characteristic. And in Denpasar, Bali, it turns out that almost all of the sky conditions are what we call detrimental overheating sun, which means, unsurprisingly, that if sun is coming into the building, then the impact of that sun is likely to be detrimental. There we go. And that is likely to cause the building to be overheated and uncomfortably warm. So now our goal is to use some shading solutions that block parts of the sky so that those sun conditions are going to be mitigated. At the base of the tool now, you're going to see a range of different shading strategies that are offered, and we're going to start by looking at the double overhang solution here, because some of these other solutions are perhaps a little bit more intensive than we want to apply on this project. So you can see that the double overhang option with a certain set of dimensions is going to block out the sun path, and block different parts of the sky. So you can see this strategy actually is quite effective at blocking a high proportion of this overheating sun and sky conditions at the beginning and the end of the day. But there's still some times where we get sun coming in through the building. So as a shape, it's not a bad way to block the sun from shape coming in. Perhaps there is a better solution. I'm going to have a look at the hood now, and the hood creates this kind of shading shape, which is a flatter shape than the double overhang, and we can see visually, without needing to be a buildings physics expert or a sustainability expert, that this is blocking more of that red, bad, detrimental sky, those sun conditions that we would like to take care of. And perhaps it's a little bit small, but it's a really good shape for us to use. So we could move ahead now with the hood as a design solution, or certainly as a shortlisted design solution for the project. So what we've been able to learn with this feature is that we now know some of the strategies in regards to shading, how we could possibly proceed with these. But before we move away from the shading feature, let's just show you another trick. So in a moment we'll have a look at a massing project in SketchUp, and we'll show some of the considerations for this on a model so you can visualize them. But let's say we wanted to quickly consider using a hood across different orientations. We can say click this west facade and see the impact of different strategies on the west facade, and here you can see how a hood would work on the west facade rather than on the north facade, and that the same design strategy on a different facade might achieve a different outcome in terms of how much of that detrimental sun is blocked. Again, this probably isn't a surprise. The sun is different in different directions, but perhaps if we had a building that was a little bit more orientated west, we might need something a little bit more serious, like an egg crate or a brise soleil, to help block a satisfactory amount of overheating sun. So this feature can also help you to consider the trade-off between the different orientations when we're looking at these different shading solutions. So let's change gears a little bit. What we didn't talk about at the start, but something that is included in this project, is a sort of sports hall gymnasium. It's a high school project after all, and top lighting is perfect for these sort of single story or high volume storage spaces where natural lighting comes through the roof, and this might be more suitable than natural lighting through glazing on the sides. So the goal of this feature is to kind of start to put you in the right direction on what kind of strategies would be best to explore first versus strategies that might be good to avoid. So again, we start with an analysis of the historical climate information, and we find out that in Denpasar the skies are actually variable for a lot of the time. And what does variable mean? Well, it means it's partly cloudy, or at least we have periods where the cloud comes and goes. So even though the weather's really nice, rather than being sunny all the time, we have a lot of conditions where there is a reasonable amount of cloud and sun. And this means that we potentially need to consider having a higher proportion of our roof area set aside for glazing to bring in enough light. But we do also need to be really careful of controlling direct sunlight coming into the building. So one of the strategies is recommended here is a south-facing sawtooth roof. A south-facing sawtooth solution would allow quite a lot of glazing to be used to bring in natural light. If it was facing south and had just a little bit of shading, and we can see that the glazing could be protected from direct sun, so just the diffuse light could be used in this space. And because this is a school building, we'll assume that we'd rather have diffuse light rather than direct light coming in. So I think at this time it's a good time to make a point about the recommendations that are made in PreDesign, and you'll see that there are, and you've probably seen this already, that there are star ratings that are provided for different design strategies. And what they've tried to do here is to help you identify things that are going to be more likely to be suitable, but maybe not be too firm or too strict in saying anything is right or wrong, because obviously we haven't actually started building a SketchUp model yet, and we don't even have a design. And that's the case with all of PreDesign. The clue's in the name. This is pre the designing. As before we do all the designing. So this is just to help you get a bit of direction. And what we can see here is light pipes could also be a good design for this building. it's been given a 2-star rating, only because a lot of the time when it's cloudy, we might need to use more of them in the building. So what they've tried to do is create the flexibility for you to make your own decisions about what might be good or what might not be, but also provide you with a vehicle to have that conversation with the client and steer them towards the solutions that might work better. Which is why this front end is presented in, quite a friendly, easily understood, quite graphical way. Great, so we've now got some ideas about how we can bring more natural light into our sports hall space, and we can start building it knowing that potentially we would like to have a south-facing sawtooth on that space. So to finish off within PreDesign, we're going to have a look at the outside space section here. And when we look at outside spaces, one of the things that we saw in the architectural response area was that it would be really great for us to consider having some outside space used as program space. So what this feature does is it helps us to assess what sort of interventions we would need to make an outside space comfortable and usable. And when we say comfortable, we generally mean suitable or usable for something that might be otherwise done inside. So what we've identified here, first of all, is that air movement and shading are both really important factors to consider for an outside space in Bali. And obviously it's quite warm and sunny a lot of the time. And the chart here provides some guidance as to when those sorts of interventions are likely to be useful. So we can see here this green line within the graph shows us that if we didn't do anything to an outside space in Bali, it might only be useful for 13% of the time. But if we did have some air movement and a couple of other interventions, then the outside space would actually be useful and usable for percent of the time. So these sorts of interventions can make a huge impact into how useful that outside space is. And if we're in a conversation with the client at the school, using outside space potentially as an alternative to classroom space, then this chart's going to help us to show them why that's important for us to include these sorts of strategies in their budget, and of course in this particular climate, rather than just using using shading and air movement are probably the most important factors. Sorry, my voice is starting to crack a little bit. So we're going to lead you down to that solution, and you can see how these two combined with each other are going to help you in your project. So we've now finished the tour of PreDesign, and we've got some information now to move on into our SketchUp model, I suppose, and into the actual design process itself. So we have some information about what shading strategies we would like to use. We have some information about how much glass we would maybe like to use, and we have some information about how we might want to design our outside spaces. All brilliant stuff. So next up, we're going to hop over into SketchUp, and we're going to use some of this information to inform my new SketchUp model, which is going to be this school in this fictitious Bali site. So just please bear with me a few moments as I bring up this SketchUp model. Great, so that was ready actually quicker than I thought it would be. And of course, what's happened during those few moments, the builders next door have started to cut the foundations and the concrete base of the garage next door. So I'm just going to turn up my noise cancellation, which might make my voice sound a little bit strange, but hopefully it should keep things sounding pleasant for you. Team, if you could just let me know if I sound too weird. Weirder than normal anyway, and I will maybe tweak it a little bit, but I think it's probably preferable to have me sounding a bit strange rather than having the horrible sound of that cutting disc. Now what we're going to be doing is starting off essentially with a fresh SketchUp document, and one of the things that we will do very early on in creating a SketchUp document is maybe geolocating our site. So I'm going to come over to the file, I'm going to pick geolocate here, and we can type in our address at the top, which is Denpasar, and this is our hypothetical imaginary school site just here. And we're going to look at selecting the region that we want to import, which is going to be here. We can make it smaller if we wished. And we're going to choose a provider for the imagery. So there are two options currently. There's Digital Globe and there's a high-res near map. So Digital Globe is the default one, and this is free to use with your subscription. And then we've got the high-res near map, which is a paid service from Nearmap, which gives us imagery for the USA, or sort of the main urban areas, certainly of the USA, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. So if you're working on a project within one of those locations, there's the option to pull in some higher quality, high resolution imagery. But we'll just go with Digital Globe. I'm going to hit import and it's going to pull in our site, something like this, and this is where it's going to be. Now if we want to actually get back to PreDesign or start PreDesign from the beginning, we can come to the file menu here, we can choose start PreDesign. That option will be there if you're using the SketchUp 2021 client, and that's just going to fire up our web browser at predesign.sketchup.com. Just going to point out a couple of things I didn't point out earlier. At the top right hand corner of the screen, if you've signed in already, we've got different languages to choose from. So if you prefer to work in a different language, this is where you can find it, and our units are just here too. In the bottom right hand corner of the screen, we've got a really great help option, and the bit that I would encourage you to have a look at is submitting new features. So if there's any feedback that you have to give in terms of how it works or things that you would like to see within SketchUp, hit that one there. But one thing I would really recommend you have a look at is the guide section, and this will give you walkthrough guides for each section of PreDesign across the different projects that are here for you. So not entirely dissimilar to what we've talked about today, but if you need a little bit of a refresher, or you want to see some examples of things that aren't in Bali, go ahead and hit one of those. So I'm going to go back into my Bali project. You'll also see the notepad signpost that appears at the top here. This will also activate a guide for this page. Now, in our seasons page, which we did look at earlier, there was one thing I forgot to talk about, and this was this little icon here, which is the wind direction. So this shows the predominant wind direction for our location. And what we can see here is predominantly easterly or westerly winds. So we can perhaps factor that into our design. In particular, what's going to be of interest is that it is reasonably windy in the very hottest portion of the year. So definitely something we want to be looking at. So let's go and start doing some of those things. So back in SketchUp here, our hypothetical site, we've just placed a couple of blocks for our school, and these blocks are taking advantage of our north and south, which we know that we can deal with reasonably effectively in terms of shading. We've created a space in between for our outdoor space, because we know from PreDesign that people would rather be outside a lot of the time, but also we have oriented it. Oh, my brain's not working. We've oriented it in such a way that it allows for the wind to pass through it in that east and west direction. So nice and simple. We're going to come into the next phase, and we're going to place our gymnasium. So our gymnasium, as we know, we're not so worried about the shading and the glazing options on that building, because primarily we're going to be using a diffuse top lighting situation. So this has been placed just next to this here. It's connected with the same outside space, and actually our openings have been designed in such a way that it's going to allow for that breeze and that wind to pass through the buildings in those hottest periods of the year. So it's really straightforward so far. Now let's have a look at our openings. We won't spend a lot of time looking at this, but what we've done is I've already actually placed some openings in this one here, but we could see that our glazing ratio, as we had earlier, if we were trying to take into considerations both the client's requirements of only using a single glaze solution and the climate's the climate's requirement of it being pretty hot, the most we can kind of get away with there was that 48% glazing. So we've just gone ahead and placed glazing that covers roughly 48% of the north and south elevations of the building. We've got a little bit on the sides and we'll have a look at those later. So what we're going to have a look at now is actually a part of SketchUp and actually the 3D warehouse that is related to some of the things that we've been looking at within PreDesign. So there's a new feature that was launched last year as part of the SketchUp 2021 launch, which is available to other people using older versions of SketchUp as well, and that is a new function or a new feature called live components, which we can find in the 3D warehouse. And live components are a new type of geometry which we can find. Let's just have a look at Windows to begin with. We can find, if we search for various different things and we can filter it by live component, we'll see a selection of components from SketchUp that are configurable. So the one we'll just have a look at here is window. So we're just looking at building exteriors right now. Let's just have a look at the single pane window. So what makes the live components special is they are essentially pre-configured parametrically adjustable geometry. So I can click on configure component and I can actually configure within the 3D warehouse some parameters of this. So this is a really simple one. We can just configure the width and the height of a window and we can download it into our model. You'll also see a few other options for depth, the different types of trim for this window, casement options, color options, that type of thing. And every single live component is unique and has its own selection of parameters to adjust. So we can just hit download and that would bring that into our model. If you're using one of the older versions of SketchUp, it will download and just place that straight in there. If we're using SketchUp 2021, as we'll see in a moment, we'll have a few other options to deal with as well. Well, not to deal with, but to be able to use. So let's go across to look at some of the shading options. So let's pop those on there. And what we can see there is I've actually populated the facade here with some shading already. And these are just the hood shading at the moment. So if we go into our components, and you can see here, this is all one component that's been placed repeatedly across the side of the building. There's a few different ways we can get actually back to our live components. So under entity info, we've got a box here for configure. So we can actually configure it here. You can either right click it and do configure live component just here, or if you're familiar with how dynamic components work, you can actually double click on the component and it's going to open up the sort of in-app configurator just here. So this is the advantage that SketchUp 2021 has, is that you can make changes afterwards as well. So what we saw was that maybe on our shading options, we've got a few different ones to choose from. Let's maybe have a look at the egg crate, which was a really intense solution. And what we can see here is now our school kind of looks a bit like a prison. Probably the best place for children, if you ask me. But maybe that's not what we want. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing. Let's perhaps put that back to something that is maybe a bit cheaper and maybe a little bit more attractive in this case. So as we saw in our pre-design session earlier, the hood option gave us really good coverage for the north and also for the south. So let's go with that one. Where's my hood? Which is where we were before. You'll also see there are some guidelines for the dimensions that were used for the for this basic calculation here for the orientation. So you can actually copy across some of these if you wish. So we might use the fin depth or something like that there if we wanted to. So you can see the kinds of options that we've that we've got here. And of course we could possibly even consider using these models here for slightly more complex computational building performance analysis later, and this can be a really straightforward way perhaps to optimize that. Oh, I'll put it back to the prison. Sometimes it'll take a little bit of time just to load. There is a web app as well, so it's connecting to the servers. And let's go back for my hood. Where's my hood? There it is. Right, let's go with that one. So we can see that we've got that on the north and south. But again, perhaps on our east and west sides, where we know that these shading options are less effective, maybe we would want to spend some more money or look at a different shading solution just for those sides. I don't know if you can hear those drills going there. I hope not. So maybe we could do the prison look just on the side, or maybe the brise soleil, which we know that was also quite effective and not so ugly. Okay, so we can see how we have started to offer some useful early stage design based upon the recommendations from PreDesign. So let's have a look at another live component, and that's going to be for our gymnasium here. So for our gymnasium, as we saw earlier on, top lighting, we know that a sawtooth facing south was a really good solution there. So we're actually just going to cut our openings in the roof there, and we're going to look for the sawtooth live component. And let's do sawtooth, see if that brings it up. Models, we've got all the user ones, and you can see the SketchUp Labs one there, but I'm just going to filter it out. You can see the one SketchUp Labs component here. So with this one, I'm just going to download this one straight in now. I'm not going to configure it before it comes in. I'm going to place it here. And what kind of makes this one a little bit more interesting is that this one's also placeable as an array. So let's just let that load up. Oops. What we can see is that my roof is 15 meters long, 7 meters across. So I'm going to just create a window or a set of windows that fits in there. And let's turn it on as an array first of all, and we're going to do the total one there as 15 meters, and we're going to set the width there as, what did I say, 5? Nope, 7, sorry. And here we can see we can add in extra elements, so maybe we'll go for sort of 10. And you see there's some other interesting parameters that can be adjusted. Like so. So maybe we'll go for something like that. Oh, we're now starting to meet, we're starting to meet some of those requirements and some of those recommendations from PreDesign. Now let's just copy that across to my other side. There we go. So now we've got a really great starting point to continue on with our design process. So I think this is primarily what we wanted to show you. Hopefully that gave you a really good overview of what PreDesign is, where you can use it, and how we can maybe move that on into SketchUp later on. And that pretty much concludes the webinar and the presentation for today. Hopefully you've been asking questions as we've been going through. I've not had a look there. I think what we'll probably do is leave the webinar running and give people the opportunity to ask some questions. We won't be answering those live, unfortunately. I need to go, but we will be there in text answering questions. If there's anything we can't answer straight away for you, we will email you afterwards with the thing there. By all means, contact me directly if you want about PreDesign, about upgrades, about anything to do with SketchUp. Love talking about SketchUp. love showing it off. My email should just be on screen now. So brilliant. Thank you ever so much for joining. Hopefully the cutting saw next door wasn't too bad. I look forward to you joining us in future webinars for some other subjects. And likewise, if there's any part of SketchUp, any part of plugins, rendering, whatever it might be that you would like to see us do a webinar for, again, love to hear some suggestions, because we're all about creating meaningful content for you. So again, thank you. It's Adam signing off. Ta-ra.